there, Vicky here. So today I'm working on some meal prep breakfast biscuits. And my spouse likes breakfast biscuits. They're easy to take to work. You can freeze them. So that's what we're working on. I'm gonna make these biscuits. This recipe came from my sister. I have no idea where she might have gotten it, but they're amazing. These biscuits are really good. So I will be making several batches of biscuits. We also have bacon and sausage to cook and eggs. And I'm gonna do the eggs and the sausage on sheet pans so I can cut them to the same size as the biscuits. These biscuits have a benefit of being square or rectangular shaped anyway. So all of this ends up making something that will actually cohesively come together. So yeah, I'm gonna get started with this by preheating the oven. And then we'll get the rest of our ingredients and go from there. All right, first things first, got my ingredients out. This recipe really doesn't require very much. It's flour, baking soda, baking powder, buttermilk, and butter, and a salt. That's it. Now, I don't keep buttermilk on hand, and the grocery store I prefer to go to, Lidl, does not sell buttermilk. So, you can, and I do, sort of make my own just using milk and vinegar. So, I measured out 3/4 of a cup of milk, and then I put a cap full of vinegar inside of it. I don't know what that really is in measurements, but the internet can probably help you with that. So I got my buttermilk sort of sitting aside, and I measured out the dry ingredients. I did sift them. While that is certainly not a requirement, I do not like eating big chunks of baking soda. It's just not something I enjoy. So I sift my dry ingredients. Um, and then I cut in the butter. There's lots of ways you can do this. If you have a tool called a pastry cutter, you can use that. I don't have one. You could also use a fork. I don't prefer to do that. Um, I prefer to just use my fingers. And so I cut the butter up into little pieces and I put the little pieces in the flour. And then I squish the butter into the flour, and I keep doing that until it is resembling like coarse sand and the flour starts kind of sticking to itself. That's how I do it. You can do it however you like. I think some people also do a food processor for this kind of step, but I don't. So then I added in the buttermilk, air quote buttermilk, and you mix that just until the dough just comes together. Now the recipe says to knead this dough for 2 minutes. I do not do that. In part because my dough is always too sticky to knead. But what I do is I sort of hold the dough and I add any dry bits that didn't get mixed in sort of on top. And then I fold it over on itself. And then I flatten that and I add the dry bits and I fold it and I flatten it and I fold it. And that to me helps make the layers that you want in a biscuit. You could do this on your cutting board, but I tend to just do it in my hand. So that is the process that I do for these biscuits. Then I put them on a piece of parchment paper. I don't grease this or anything. Um, Although you certainly could grease it with butter, it'd be delicious. And then I pat it out into a rectangular shape. The intent is to end up with 12 biscuits, so I try to make, it rectangular proportionally so I can have 12 that are about the same size when I cut them. So, unlike most biscuit recipes where you're either dropping the biscuits or you're like rolling it out and cutting out a shape, these you just score with a knife. And you don't cut all the way through and you don't separate them. You just bake them in their little rectangular shape. And since you score the dough on top, it does make it to where you can easily break the biscuits apart. I tend to score it just with a butter knife. You don't need anything fancier than that. And I just cut out my 12 little shapes and pop them in the oven. I did do a little bit of cleanup in between. I ended up making four total batches of the biscuit recipe. Now, we did not get everything done in one day. So we ended up eating at least a whole batch of biscuits in the 2 days before I came back and finished making the breakfast biscuits. So, yeah, it was delicious. They're really good with just butter and jam. But, yeah, look at that. It's amazing. So, a couple days later, came back to work on my biscuit fillings. So I had two, um, you know, pucks of sausage, tubes of sausage. I don't know. I really bought four at the store, but I have tried making this and putting three of the packs of sausage out on the sheet pan, and the sausage just ends up being way too thick of a layer in the biscuit. So I decided to go with two, and it might be a little too thin. Happy medium might be two and a half. Because I sure would have liked to have a little bit more sausage for that corner. But this was not a greased sheet pan or anything. Just taking the sausage, putting it on top, and spreading it out until it's this even thin layer. I put that in the oven at 350 and then I started cracking my eggs and I decided to go with 18 eggs for this. But you do you. So I cracked all of the eggs into a large bowl so that I'd be able to mix them and season them to my liking. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see one of the eggs had a double yolk. See, that's it right there. I love it when that happens. It's just like a little extra, oh, fun thing with the eggs. I don't know. I seasoned these just with paprika, garlic powder, and onion powder because the sausage is salty. I did not want to add salt to the eggs. I am making these primarily for a person who is sensitive to salt. So there you go. You certainly could if you would like yours to be more seasoned. I don't want the eggs to stick to the sheet pan, so I covered the sheet pan in foil and then I put a large piece of parchment paper on top and I sprayed that really well with cooking spray and then just dumped the eggs in. These went in alongside the sausage, and in total it cooked about 15 minutes, maybe a little more. I think I started at 10 to see how it would go, and then increased it until the eggs were just set. The middle most portion of the sheet pan of eggs was still a little runny when I finally took them out. I am not terribly concerned about that because these breakfast biscuits are going in the freezer and then they will be microwaved to warm them up, and that most certainly will cook the eggs thoroughly. Now we like cheese on our breakfast biscuits. Usually I grate this and I just put grated cheese in the middle of the biscuit when I freeze it. Received a request from the last time I had made breakfast biscuits to please keep the cheese separate because it aids in the defrosting process. When, we go straight from frozen to the microwave and we've got the cheese in the middle, the cheese does tend to just melt itself into oblivion and then you don't really taste cheese. So I did my best to keep the cheese separate. I struggled a lot to cut it into reasonably thin slices. for the sandwiches, and I decided to just store each slice in a little wrapper of parchment paper so that when you heat, you've got your breakfast sandwich, you've got your cheese, you can thaw, defrost, microwave the breakfast sandwich, and then add the cheese to it, or maybe thaw the cheese as well. Regardless, I don't know. I thought it should be separate. Okay. And it was very difficult to cut. So, in order to make my life smarter and not harder, I remembered that the side of my cheese grater, or grater in general, not just for cheese, but it's got this little slice on it. And I've never used this little slice on the side of the grater before, but man, it really did the job well. And so I imagine this is what it was intended to be used for. So I decided to use that to slice up the rest of the cheese. I thought that 2 blocks really was enough for the amount of biscuits we had left over. And I decided that each sandwich really needed 3 little slices of the cheese. So then when I was packing up the rest, I put 3 little slices in each of these little parchment packets. And that's how I portioned out all of the cheese for all of these breakfast sandwiches. Um, if we were eating them right now, of course, the preparation would be a little different, but we're not. We're eating these over the next month. Um, so, yeah, the cheese itself was a lot easier when I used a tool that was more appropriate. So, yeah, recommend that. But there's the eggs and the meat that came out of the oven. I let it sit on the pans on top of the oven for about 10 minutes until they were cool enough to handle, but not so long that they were like cold, if that makes sense. I was a little worried about food safety leaving them out for too long. So I really just made it long enough for them to be easily handleable. And I used my pizza cutter to cut the sausage because that was way easier than a knife. I was just really in the work smarter, not harder mode at that point. And then it was just time to assemble the biscuits. So I put a sausage and a egg square in between my biscuit, and then I added a little cheese packet in the bag. Usually I will individually label these bags. Today I did not feel like it. So I instead added a bunch of the individual portions of the biscuits to a larger bag, which I did label with the date and the contents so that we would know what it was. And generally, I would say don't do that. Label each individual portion. But I just didn't feel like spending the extra 20 minutes to label all of the bags today, so I didn't do that. But overall, I mean, it's really pretty simple to build these breakfast sandwiches. If I were in the mood to make additional dirty dishes, I probably would have assembled them on a cutting board. That way I could just like cut the top off of the entire batch of biscuits, lay out all of my sandwiches, put all the tops back on. That would have been a little more efficient. But I didn't want to dirty up a cutting board at this point in the day. So I did not. Now, because I am an imperfect person, my meat slices and my egg slices and my biscuits are all different sizes, right? Nothing is a perfect square. So, what I did try to do when I was pairing up my meat and my eggs is I tried to pick ones that were similarly sized to my biscuit. And sometimes that meant kind of jumping around on the pan or cutting a piece in half so that it would better fit the size of the biscuit that I had. But then I just package these up in my larger gallon sized bags because they are stored in individually in the freezer bag. The gallon sized bag is just a storage variety zip top bag. And I think that's absolutely fine because they're in the freezer bags inside the storage bag. Plus, I didn't have any gallon sized freezer bags. But I just continued to assemble all of these little breakfast sandwiches and put them in with their cheese slices, so that it will be really easy for us to take and go breakfast. Now, if you choose to do something like this, I have a couple of recommendations in terms of thawing slash defrosting, cooking, warming, reheating, whatever you want to call it, these back up. First, wrap it in, if it's frozen and you're going directly into the microwave, which is what I do 99% of the time. Wrap it in a damp paper towel, microwave it for like a minute on the defrost setting, flip it over, microwave it for another minute on defrost, see how warm it is, and then microwave it for 30 seconds to a minute on the not defrost setting. That should get it done for you. If you choose to forego the defrost setting altogether and just microwave it on high, it will get done faster, but the bread will get a little tough on you. So that is why I don't do it like that. Um, if you are taking it with you to work or school or whatever, it will defrost some before you arrive, especially if you take it out of the freezer an hour or two before you're going to eat it. So then I would just go straight to the microwaving on high, but do it in 30-second increments until it's all delicious. So that is how we tend to consume these. I do have some more bacon to make some more of these sandwiches this weekend, maybe, but I didn't have time for that now. So what I did is just froze the rest of the biscuits and froze the rest of the cheese, and they're gonna go and wait until I have time to cook the bacon, and then I will assemble these in a very similar manner. But if you make it, tell me how it goes, and I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.